I spent about 6 months living alone in a farmhouse while the owner went traveling with his family. It was a small dairy farm in north-central Pennsylvania, small enough that the family of 6 worked it alone with a few part-time hands when needed. The farm sat at the center of about 50 acres, ringed by tree lines that turned to black walls after sundown. They grew their own feed and kept some livestock for the table and the local butcher. The owner was a friend, and I was between jobs, so it was nice to relax for 6 months rent-free and finish the great American novel inside this big, quaint farmhouse with a massive bathtub, ballroom studio, and a walk-in freezer of food, like an Andrew Wyeth version of the Overlook Hotel. Except, like that hotel, the place had a way of breathing at night. Old beams cooling, pipes ticking, something always just settling. My first encounter with the neighbor who lived 2 miles up the road came when a woman knocked on the door. She was a well-worn 20-something in a thin t-shirt and torn jeans, no jacket against the cold drizzle, mascara running in 2 long black streaks down a face that was too pale by half. At the far end of the walkway to the gate, which she'd left open, a white Lexus idled at the curb, piloted by a well-tanned beef face with dark shades and a mouth that looked like the seam between 2 heavy pieces of brown marble. He looked like the star of an Indian version of the Terminator, at least from his neck up. He didn't move when I opened the door. He didn't even seem to be breathing. The blonde wobbling on the porch had a story rehearsed. Please, they're following me. I just need to come inside for a minute. Just a minute. Please. As this was the first conversation I'd had with a real person in 2 days. I admit I stammered a bit. Plus, the way she slurred through her words, the way her eyes kept skipping past me into the dark of the hallway behind me, made my skin pull tight along the back of my neck. Who's following you? She just stared for a few seconds as if I would answer the question for her, then said, Please, I'm gonna die out here. Just let me in. Just for a minute. She seemed irritated that I was delaying. The man in the car, who I decided was not a concerned friend, giving a frightened woman a ride to safety, shifted a little in his seat. The Lexus rocked under his weight. He still didn't take off the sunglasses, and the rain on the windshield made his face look like it was running off his skull. My reaction was to assume this was an attempt to get into the house. My experiences have taught me that a sob story at the front door is the perfect distraction while someone slips around the back or into the barn. So I smiled politely and said something like, I can call the police for you from here. I'll stay on the line with you through the door, but I'm not opening it. Her face changed. Not all at once, it went in stages, like a slow shutter clicking through frames. First, a flash of fury, then nothing. Then something that wasn't a person at all, just a flat, empty assessment, the way a dog looks at a thing it can't decide whether to bite. Open the door, she said, quietly now. No more shaking, no more crying. Just open the door, sweetheart. I shut it. I shut it hard. I went into sentry mode. I walked the main floor to make sure it was secure, scanned the open yard behind the house, and back to the main staircase by the front door, pausing to see that the Lexus was still idling at the curb. The gate was still open, and the woman was now standing perfectly still on the porch with her face about 2 inches from the front window, watching me. Not the door. Me. Her breath fogged the glass in slow, even pulses, like a metronome. I went upstairs to get a better view of the grounds. I snatched up the cordless phone in the main hallway and carried it into each room. The yard and farm were clear, or so I thought, until I checked the second-floor window over the kitchen and saw the boot prints already mashed into the wet flower bed under the back porch. Someone had been there. Maybe still was. Someone started pounding on the front door. Given the meaty thumps, I decided it was the Lexus driver coming up with the hard sell. I ignored this until his 5th attempt shook the heavy wooden door in its frame, and I heard the wood crack somewhere near the deadbolt. The house was large enough that it used an intercom system that linked all the rooms, the barn, and the other small buildings on the property. From the kitchen, I activated the comm to the front porch with one hand and prepared to dial 911 with the other. Hey, if you keep punching my door like that, it doesn't make me think you're a nice person I want inside my house. A moment later, Beef Tits figured out the comm. His voice came through the little speaker too loud, too close, like he had his mouth pressed against the grill. "Open the door, bro. Open the door. You don't open the door, this gets bad for you. You hear me? This gets really bad." He punctuated this with another round of door percussion that lasted almost a full minute. Somewhere in the middle of it, I realized he was laughing. I replied, "Not my problem. Get gone or go to jail. Stop hitting the door, bro." One or both of them slammed the screen door so hard I knew there had to be damage. I looked out into the yard from the big bay window and saw someone on a small tractor, something the size of a riding mower, heading for one of the chicken coops. This was not a farmer, just a thin man in jeans and a polo shirt riding his garden hopper over the grass, dragging a small trailer with a cage in it. He was smiling. Not at anything in particular, just smiling, wide and wrong, the way a face smiles when nobody is supposed to be looking at it. So when the 911 operator answered, I described this scene. A woman and a man pounding on my front door demanding I let them in. A stranger on a tractor crossing my yard toward the chickens. And the operator's tone shifted from skeptical to professional in about 2 seconds. She agreed to send a cruiser, and she got more committed once Meat Biscuits made an appearance in the window at the back of the house and screamed something loud enough that I could hear him. The 911 operator could hear him, and even the weirdo on the tractor could hear him a couple of football fields downrange. It wasn't a word. It was just a sound. The man at the door noticed I was on the phone and went still. His head dropped like his spiritual director called "cut," and he walked out of view toward the front of the house. The woman at the window stayed there a few seconds longer, watching me without blinking, before she peeled away from the glass and followed him. The 911 operator kept me on the line. I switched to speaker so anyone still on the porch could hear the dispatcher confirm Andy and Barney were on the way. The weirdo on the tractor calmly turned his rig around and headed back the way he came, as if on a joyride through the tall grass. I gave as good a description as I could before he disappeared into the tree line. By the time the local police arrived, there was nothing left of the pair on the porch, except the dust their Lexus kicked up, gunning it off the property. The police talked to the weirdo on the tractor, the neighbor from up the road. He did have a small tractor with a cage on it, but there wasn't much they could do until the Lexus was spotted and stopped a little later. Once the pair rolled on my neighbor, the police charged him, which, as a registered sex offender, put him in jail. The guy lived in a small shack at the end of the lane just beyond the property line, and he was trying to score chickens. He couldn't pay in cash, so he was going to pay in meth, which the cops told me he had in abundance. I told this story to the owner of the house when he called the following day. He didn't seem surprised about his neighbor, but the rest left him gasping for air. After that, the local police sent a car around 2 or 3 times every day, sometimes stopping in to check on me. I got to know them pretty well. They were nice guys, but I was an outsider, and even though they knew the owner of the house as a good man of strong character, it clearly wasn't a strong enough endorsement to leave me alone in that farmhouse at night. And I'll be honest, for the rest of those 6 months, I never slept in any room where a window looked out onto the porch. It was summer 2019. We were down at our mobile site in Wexford like we are every year. It sits directly across the road from Artemine Beach near Cortown. The beach is part of the routine. Bonfires, music, staying out too late, the smell of smoke in your hair when you finally head back. That night, it was around 10:30 when we got the fire going. The tide was out, leaving the rocky stretch exposed. The sea was calm, barely making a sound against the shore. The only real noise was the crackling of the fire and bits of conversation drifting in and out. I was standing with my friend Awif when I noticed something down near the rocky path that leads onto the beach. At first, it looked like a normal person. He was in a gray tracksuit and walking along the rocks. I nudged Awif. "Can you see that person?" She squinted into the dark. "Yeah, I can see him. It wasn't just me. We both watched it. The figure was climbing over the rocks, moving carefully but steadily toward us. It wasn't stumbling in the dark as you'd expect. It wasn't using a phone torch. It just moved confidently, trying to get closer in a slow way. There was something about it that didn't feel right. Even from a distance, it looked flat and creepy, too gray like a ghost, and no variation in colors at all. No reflection from the firelight. The rest of us had orange flicker on our faces and clothes. This thing didn't. Still, it looked like a person. As it came closer, I noticed the other girls at the fire had gone quiet, though none of them were looking in the direction we were. They were just sitting there, not talking, staring into the flames like they'd forgotten how to make conversation. I took out my phone. I don't even know why. Maybe to prove we weren't imagining it. Maybe because if it were just some random man walking toward a group of teenage girls at night, we should have a photo. I stood exactly where Awife and I had been watching it from and took the picture. And right after I pressed the button, it disappeared. It didn't walk away, just faded like sand into the air. The rocks were empty. I looked straight down at my phone. There was something in the photo, right where it had been standing. But it wasn't a person. It was a gray shape, solid enough to see clearly, but not shaped like a human. There were no arms, no legs, and it didn't have any face. Just a gray mass, slightly darker than the night around it. It wasn't smoke because the fire was behind us. This was in front of us, walking near the rocks. Awife grabbed my arm and just said, "What was that?" We didn't talk about it much after that. We stayed by the fire, trying to act normal. I kept looking back at the rocks. One of the younger ones, Kawim, asked why I kept turning my head, and I told her I thought I'd dropped my lighter. She handed me hers without saying anything and went back to looking at the fire. About 20 minutes later, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out thinking it was my ma'am. The screen was open on the camera roll. The photo was up. I hadn't opened it again since. I'd shown the photo to Awif. I locked it and put it back in my hoodie. Eventually, we walked back across the road to the mobile site. The road between the beach and the site is narrow, with hedges on both sides. Halfway across, I heard footsteps behind us on the tarmac, the slap of something flat-soled. Oife turned around the same time I did. There was nobody on the road. The footsteps had stopped exactly when we did. She went into hers, I went into mine. I had a dog then, and we called him Junior, a big staffy. He looked tough, but he was the softest dog you could meet. He didn't bark unless there was an actual reason. That night, he started barking the minute I walked in. He wasn't barking at me. He was facing the door behind me, and his ears were back. I had to step over him to get into the kitchen because he wouldn't move. Later, my ma'am and I were sitting in the living room watching a film when we heard a knock on the mobile window. We didn't move at first. Junior went mad, deep barking, the kind he'd only ever done if someone was actually outside or he sensed something was very wrong. Ma'am pulled back the curtain straight away. There was nothing. We tried to brush it off as kids messing. The mobiles are close together, and teenagers go around at night sometimes and do pranks. Ma'am went and made tea and put the kettle on twice because she forgot she'd already done it. We went back to the film. About 10 minutes later, 3 taps again on the same window. It sounded exactly like the previous knocking. This time, Ma'am went out the front door with the torch on her phone. She walked the whole way around the mobile, but she didn't find any footprint or anybody there. The ground was soft from the tide air. There would have been prints. When we went to bed, Junior wouldn't settle. He slept in my ma'am's room and kept jumping up, growling into the corners of the room, like he was warning us about something and watching something we couldn't see. He had never acted like that before, and he never acted like that again after that night. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. At one point, I heard what sounded like someone walking slowly down the hallway of the mobile, past my door. The mobile is small. There's nowhere to walk to. I waited for the bathroom light to click on, but nothing. The footsteps stopped outside my door and didn't move again. I stayed under the duvet until I heard Ma'am getting up for the kettle at about 6:30. The next day, I showed Ma'am the photo and told her everything properly. How it had looked like a person at first, how it kept coming closer, how it vanished the second I took the picture. She didn't hesitate. "You gave it attention," she said, "and it followed you." She told me to delete the photo. I said I would, but I didn't. Artemine Beach and Cortown Harbor are known for their undercurrents. There's a stretch where you can walk out for ages, and then suddenly there's a drop. The current catches you before you realize what's happening. Over the years, people have drowned there. A boy in the 70s, a man in the early 2000s, a woman more recently than that. People still leave flowers tied to the railings near the harbor wall. Sometimes I think that when it was far away, it looked human, because that's what my brain expected to see. But the closer it got, the less human it became, and the camera didn't see a man in a tracksuit. It saw what was really there. A few weeks ago, Awifa rang me and asked if I still had the photo. I said I did. She said she'd had a dream the night before, where she was back on the rocks at Artemine, and the gray shape was standing right behind her, and when she turned around, it had my face. It was a very warm Saturday in early June when I clocked in for work. Eager as I was, my second day at this grocery store, where I was working to make some additional cash to take with me for college when I moved back to San Diego to attend university for my senior year. I worked at a grocery store in the summer of 2024, a grocery store that I had worked for previously for almost a year and a half during the pandemic, which was a crazy time with some crazy stories, but none like this one. A little context about our smaller suburb of the Bay Area in Northern California. This is a very blue-collar, hard-working part of the Bay Area where most folks either live check to check, are barely middle class at best, or resort to crime. I grew up in this area, so it taught me a lot about being street smart. Our area has seemed to become more educated thanks to great parents like mine, pushing kids and me my age to not fall into the three true outcomes and teaching us that there's more to life than just working hard and barely surviving. My dad always taught me from a young age to expect people's worst intentions. That way, you're surprised if it doesn't happen and ready to react if it does. I clocked in, and it was only my second day on the job, though I already pretty much had everything down from my previous experience, and I was trusted to run the front end of the store with minimal help and supervision. We only have 26 employees at the store, and on average we have about 5 employees for closing past 6 p.m., so it makes potential issues with customers much harder to deal with. But luckily the store dies down past 7 p.m., and we close at 9. Around 3:30, when everyone was still at the store, we had 3 little boys and a mother walk in. The mother was carrying a small dog travel bag, like one of those bags you put your dog inside of and carry with you. One of the kids was holding the dog, however, and insisted on finding a place to leave the dog inside the store. One of my managers decided to put the dog in the office in the back with the kid to avoid any health code violations. After about 5 minutes, I heard on our intercom system the code for theft in progress and to scan all aisles. One of my managers, I'll give him the name of Sean, had long hair like mine, and he made eye contact with me as he walked out, so I knew it was serious. He only did this if the person seemed like they were about to leave, so he could catch them red-handed, so I knew we were about to pounce on whoever this was. The family started checking out behind me, and the other boy came back with the dog. I'm not sure if it was that boy or one of the others, though, but one of them left the store with that bag while they were checking out, thinking in the moment it was strange, and realizing my other manager, Jess, had hoped on the register. I feared what my gut was telling me. As I heard the kid screaming outside for his mom, he was screaming bloody murder as Sean reappeared with the bag in his hand, threw it on the vacant register in front of me, and opened the bag. Immediately I was horrified. Lotion, rubbing alcohol, a bunch of meds and chemicals that we had on aisle 1 was littered everywhere in the bag. Immediately, I made the connection that this was likely a drug kit of some kind, but I said nothing. The mother started screaming, and Jess and Sean, as another supervisor, I'll call Maya, came running from behind me. She was the one who called in the alert, so she saw everything from the cameras. There was muffled screaming as it spilled over outside. I heard the kid lie and say, "Sean hit him," and heard Maya scream at the mom. So here's what's going to happen. I'm calling the cops, and they'll call CPS because you specifically filled the bag and told your son to run with all this stuff. After a few minutes, they left. and I had no customers. So I inspected the bag further, and I saw even more glaringly that this looked like a drug kit. Again, living in this area, you learn a thing or two you wish you didn't. I knew I needed to tell my managers because no one else was talking about it. So I decided to wait until after the day was over to tell Jess, since she was the store owner's daughter. But that's not where this story ends. My day was just beginning. The day went on, and I completely forgot about the incident and carried out my nightly tasks. By 8 p.m., I got a pop-up message on my monitor, which told me I needed more cash in my register. So I called my manager on the intercom. She went back to the safe and called my register, and I told her what bills I needed specifically. Then I told the other cashier to start handling the go-backs and proceed with the night closing routine. I remember she disappeared into aisle 2, the exact moment when this happened. A man standing at about 6'1", maybe 200 pounds, in his late 30s, with a black mask, a red hoodie over his head, a red beanie, and I believe a black tank top, walked in with ripped jeans and red shoes, holding something behind his back. For reference, I am 5'10", 215 pounds, and an above-average build. I worked out often, then, and still do. So that wasn't intimidating at all for me, being that I grew up around hacks like these and mostly knew how to avoid having problems with them. But what really scared me was his eye. They were bloodshot red, and the way he stared at me from the entrance. There was about a 5 to 10 yard distance between us. And I knew I was in a bad spot, being that I was alone up front, and we were short-staffed since it was nighttime. But what scared me was now my suspicions were confirmed. That was a drug kit we stopped. And this person in front of me is not in his right mind. He's likely on acid or meth, and I was in a serious situation. As I broke the tension, I said, "What's up, bruh? What you need?" He turned his head sideways in a very intimidating motion and muttered, "Are you the only dude in here with long hair?" "Excuse me?" I said with a monotone voice. I said, "Are you the only dude in here with long hair?" I froze. I knew I wasn't the only one, but the question was so specific it hit me like a bullet. Even preparing myself mentally wasn't enough for what he eventually began threatening. "No, there are a few others." "Why?" I said. "Like who?" he asked. "Why do you care?" "What's going on here, bro? What you need?" "Stop playing around," I said. "Come outside, boy," he said, instantly. Any comfort I tried to provide myself internally slowly turned to fear of life and death. I began to fear for my safety. The look on this man's face and the way his eyes glowed red told me he wanted me dead, or as close to it as possible. "I'm not going outside for anything." "Maybe you should, though," I said. "Yeah, 'cause you're scared, that's why," he said. "Man, stop playing around," I said as I began shaking, knowing I was running out of ways to talk. I knew any second now, my manager Maya would appear. Finally, after a few more exchanges that felt like hours in length, my manager Maya appeared, making a joke saying, "Kid, you got my fat butt running around too damn much." She said, "I'm sorry, Maya. I got 5 customers asking for cash back and taking the max they can take, and now we've got this guy," I said as I pointed to the man. Maya froze and said, "What the hell do you want? Is he the only one in here with long hair?" "Yeah, why do you care?" she said, struggling to find what to say. More exchanges kept happening where he threatened me verbally and called me names, and after a long time, we were able to call all the managers to the front, some of whom were armed with box cutters. Believe me when I say a box cutter is used right is a terribly painful weapon. The man slowly backed up to the fridge we have in front of the store, still holding something behind his back as he stole a steak and ran. My manager, Sean, ran after him. Sean, having long hair, was the guy we now know the guy was after. All the managers ran after him. I immediately got on the intercom and called all remaining store staff to the front now, abandon your duties, and lock down the store. We locked down the store, and luckily, the customers who were inside knew what had happened and were fine with being locked in, even if they had already checked out. After a minute, I announced on the intercom, "Attention shoppers, please don't be alarmed by my previous call. The incident is happening outside. There is no threat to anyone inside. We do ask that you please avoid the front glass doors until instructed otherwise. Thank you." Another 2 minutes passed, and all the managers came back. We unlocked the doors and let them in, and one of them said he had a gun, and they chased him off. I don't know if that was true or not, and I never asked. I just immediately asked to close down my register and to leave for the night, and they were beyond willing to let me go for the night. I was absolutely terrified by this experience, knowing the man was hiding something behind his back. It was one of three things: a gun, a knife, or a blunt object. If I weren't as street smart as I am, I likely would have been hurt or killed that day. The crazy part is when we called the police, the 911 operator refused to send units and ridiculed us for always calling about shoplifters and other incidents and chasing people who steal. While I don't believe we should ever chase shoplifters and I don't participate in such things, I find it ridiculous that I could have been injured or murdered, and this person would have been responsible for sending units to come help me. I hope that operator was fired. They do not deserve to be protecting our streets and responding to emergencies. If I had to solicit any advice to you, people reading or listening to this, the only thing I can tell you is if your gut is telling you something is off, get the hell out of that situation immediately. Luckily, after this, later that night, I somehow managed to catch the winter flu in the middle of summer and spent a week off recovering since I'm immunocompromised. I spent the week at my auntie's house, a town over, and came back a week later with no further incident. Honestly, I feel bad for those kids who are likely living in a broken home with a father who's a drug addict and likely could kill someone, and a mother who turns a blind eye. We had been hiking the AT through northern Pennsylvania for about a week when this happened. Pennsylvania is known on the trail as Rocksylvania because the trail is just an endless field of pointy rocks that beat your feet to hell. My friend Dan and I had been planning this section hike since the winter, and by day 6, we were both pretty wiped out. That morning, we had climbed up a long ridge and were ready for lunch. There was a shelter 2 miles ahead, down the ridge and back up another hill. We talked about just stopping where we were and eating a cold lunch on a log, but the shelter had a water source, and we were both running low on water, so we kept walking. When we got close to the shelter, we could see someone sitting at the picnic table out front. That was normal. People stop at shelters for breaks even if they don't sleep there. What was not normal was the guy himself. He had a brown external frame backpack that looked like something you'd buy at a yard sale in 1985. Most thru hikers carry these lightweight internal frame packs in bright colors. His boots were beat-up work boots, not trail runners or hiking boots. And as we walked up, he was tipping a Fritos bag into his mouth and shaking the crumbs onto his tongue. I gave Dan a look. Dan gave me one back. We sat down at the other end of the table and pulled out our food. I tried to start a normal conversation. "You backpacking?" I asked. He didn't look up. "Yeah, cool. You section hiking or through hiking?" He looked up then, but not at me. He looked somewhere past my shoulder. I'm just hiking through." That's not a thing anyone says on the AT. You either pick a section like Pennsylvania to New Jersey, or you do the whole thing from Georgia to Maine. Hiking through doesn't mean anything. Dan jumped in and asked where he had started and where he was headed. The guy mumbled something about coming from down south and going up north. That covers about 2,000 miles of trail. I noticed a hatchet sitting next to his pack. Not a small camp axe, but a real pack hatchet, the kind with a rubber grip. The blade had something dark on it that could have been dirt, rust, or something else. He kept reaching over and touching the handle while we talked. Dan asked what his trail name was. Everyone on the AT has a trail name. Mine was Slowpoke because I was always the last one into camp. Dan's was Tuna because he ate a tuna packet for lunch every single day. It's a basic thing. If you've been on the trail for more than a week, you have one. The guy went blank for a second. Trail name? Dan explained it. The guy nodded a lot while Dan talked. Then he said, "Oh, right, it's Hatchet." He was holding the hatchet in his hand when he said it. Like he had just looked down to see what was around and picked the first thing he saw. Dan and I both kind of laughed a little because we thought he was joking, but he didn't laugh. He stood up really quickly. "I gotta go." He grabbed his pack and was on the trail in under a minute. He didn't go north. He didn't go south. He went off the trail, into the brush, on a side path that wasn't marked. Dan and I sat there for a while after he left. We talked about whether we should keep going to the next shelter or stop earlier. Dan was the one who said we should stop earlier and get off the trail a bit, set up camp somewhere not obvious. I agreed. We hiked another 4 miles and then pushed off the trail into a stand of hemlocks, maybe 80 yards from the path. There was no view, no nice spot, just trees. We hung our hammocks between 4 pines. I should mention here that my dad had given me a Ruger 10-22 takedown the year before. It's a small rifle that breaks into 2 pieces and fits in a backpack. I had been carrying it on this trip because we were going to do some plinking at the end at my uncle's land in New York. It was in my pack with the bolt out. I had maybe 40 rounds of 22 long rifle in a plastic case. That night, I assembled it. I didn't tell Dan I was doing it. I just slid the barrel onto the receiver and locked it in, loaded the magazine, and slid the rifle into my hammock next to me, under the blanket. The bolt was still out and in my pocket. I felt kind of stupid doing it. The guy was a weirdo, but he had run off and we were way off the trail. It must have been past midnight when I heard the footsteps. 3 sets, not careful. They were coming up the slope toward us through the leaves. I could hear someone whispering. Dan must have heard it too, because I heard the zipper on his bug net move very slowly. A flashlight beam came through the trees and swept across Dan's hammock. I slid the bolt into the rifle and chambered around. The sound of the bolt closing is not very loud, but in those woods, it carried. The flashlight stopped. A voice said, "Hey, we just want to talk." I didn't say anything. I sat up in the hammock with the rifle pointed at the ground in front of where the voice came from. The flashlight beam was about 20 feet from me. I could see 3 shapes behind it. One of them had something long in his hand. It might have been the hatchet. "We just want your food," another voice said. This one was higher and faster. "Just leave your packs and we'll be gone." I fired 1 round into the dirt about 10 feet in front of them. The flash from the muzzle lit up the trees for half a second. The crack of a 22 is not loud like a big rifle, but at night, in the woods, it is loud enough. All 3 of them ran. They ran back the way they came, crashing through the brush, and one of them yelled something I couldn't make out. The flashlight bounced around and then was gone. Dan and I didn't sleep. We sat in our hammocks back to back, facing different directions, and talked quietly until it got light. Then we packed up faster than we had ever packed up in our lives and hiked 9 miles to the next road crossing.
Alright guys, that's gonna do it for me tonight. Whether it was that lonely stretch of the Appalachian Trail, that shadow moving down the beach, or just a regular trip to the grocery store that turned into something else entirely. All 4 of these stories tonight can hammer home the same thing, don't they? Bad stuff doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wait for a dark and stormy night. Sometimes it just walks right up to you on a Tuesday. And look, if you take nothing else from tonight, take this. At the end of the day, you are your own first line of defense, nobody else. When somebody's on the other side of your door crying and begging to be let in, or trying to coax you out into a parking lot at 2 in the morning, you do not owe that person a thing. You stay put, you keep that door locked, and when your gut starts screaming at you that something isn't right, you listen to it. That little voice in the back of your head is trying to save your life. Don't shush it just because you don't want to seem rude. Because here's the hard truth, and we heard it tonight. When things really go bad, help can be a long way off. And sometimes, like that one caller found out, it doesn't come at all. So hey, if tonight's stories had you double checking your locks, go ahead and smash that like button for me. And if you are new around here, hit subscribe. We tell stories like this every week. And to the family, man, I mean it, thank you. Every single one of you, you are the reason this channel exists, and I don't take that for granted for a second. If you're not ready to call it a night yet and you want to keep the lights on a little longer, All my older videos are over on Patreon. Links down below. Can't miss it. Alright, keep your head on a swivel out there. Trust those instincts, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Good night.